Just give me 1 minute. I need to make sure it's on.
It's on.
I know, but I need to make sure it's running.
There's days when we have to look a light on it.
This council meeting is called to order in accordance with the Open Public Meetings Law. This meeting of October 17, 2022 was included in the list of meetings published in the Courier News and Star Ledger. Notice of this meeting was placed on the bulletin board at Borough Hall. In addition, a copy of this notice is available to the public, and a copy of the statement shall be included in the minutes of this meeting. Mayor Dennis Sullivan is excused this evening. Council members: Granville Brady.
Here.
Tom Mitchell.
Here.
Gina Stravic.
Here.
Roger Broom.
Here. Councilman
Weed is excused this evening. Randy Pitts.
Here. Please stand and join me in the salute to the flag.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Need a motion to approve the minutes for October 3rd.
So moved.
Second.
Council members: Granville Brady.
Yes.
Tom Mitchell.
Abstain.
Gina Stravic.
Yes.
Roger Broom.
Yes.
Randy Pitts.
Yes. Departmental reports and notices are as listed. I'd like to bring up Mr. and Mrs. Willie. Here.
Yeah.
I have a proclamation. Whereas on August 3rd, 1990, George H.W. Bush declared the month of November as National American Indian Heritage Month, commonly referred to as Native American Heritage Month. And whereas the bill read in part, the President is authorized and requested to call upon federal, state, and local governments, groups, and organizations, and the people of the United States to observe each month with appropriate programs, ceremonies, and activities. And whereas the landmark bill honoring America's tribal people aims at providing a platform to share culture, traditions, craft, dance, and concepts of life. I'd like to present this to you.
I would just like to say a couple of words. I don't want to take up too much of your time. It's very important business here. But on behalf of the Native American peoples of Somerville, Somerset County, and of New Jersey, I want to thank you for giving us this proclamation and honoring November as Native American Heritage and History Month. We just always want to say that we're still here. And we want to also say we always welcome you to our table. I say in my language, Wado, which means thank you.
Thank you. Committee reports. I'll start to my left. Councilman Mitchell.
Okay. Carrying on with what President Pitts has just proclaimed, do not forget that we are having the Native American Heritage Celebration on November 5th, which is a Saturday, and the rain date is November 6th. That's going to be on Division Street. We're expecting a good show for that. New Jersey Transit started a study on converting its bus fleet to 100% zero-emission vehicles as part of its bus garage modernization project. NJ Transit plans having 100% of its bus purchases be zero emission by 2032. Weekend journey through the past was very successful. Week ago, about 8 days ago. We had over 80 visitors to Borough Hall and 111 to the Fire Museum. Also, there was a tremendous turnout at the Wallace House for the Salem Oak planting. And many visitors stayed for a program about Spain helping us in the American Revolution. And that's everything I have, Mr. President.
Thank you. Councilman Groom.
So this past weekend, on Saturday, we had inspection day for our fire department. Joining the fire department were members from some of our mutual aid companies in the area. We also had our rescue squad as part of our inspection day. It's always fantastic to see our first responders out and be acknowledged in the community. We had our parade down Main Street, and there was a ceremony at the 9/11 monument that we have, and then we recognized again our firefighters during the dinner that night. Just a few reminders: October is Fire Prevention Month. Fire Prevention Week just ended. Again, it was the 100th year that Fire Prevention Week has existed since it was started in 1922. Just make sure that we check our smoke detectors. Make sure that every at least once a year the batteries are changed out if you have ones that require batteries. The recommendation, as I stated at the last meeting, is that you have a smoke detector per room, not just in the common hallways, but the recommendation from the NFPA now is that it is in every bedroom and all common spaces as well. So that way you have that, and if possible, interconnectivity. That way if one goes off, they all go off. And the big thing that the NFPA just put out a few videos on on their website, I believe, about the dangers of smoke and having a plan. The biggest thing you can do is have a plan. Once that smoke gets hot and thick, it's hard to see through and it's really hard to breathe. You can actually burn your lungs. So the sooner that you know, the quicker you can get out. Make sure you have a plan A, B, and C. Again, make sure that you check your smoke alarms. Make sure that you check your, everyone's supposed to have in their house or apartment a fire extinguisher. Those also have a shelf life of 10 years, so just make sure that those are up to date. Because again, it's the little things that can save a lot of time if you know and you have them and you have that early morning. So again, I'd like to thank our firefighters, our EMS, and our mutual aid for joining us on Saturday and all the hard work that they do throughout the year. We had a call on Sunday morning, and every engine showed up. Luckily, it didn't turn out to be anything, which is always a pleasure. Just a little overheated boiler, and we took care of it. But our mutual aid companies were on their way, and we called them back. So it's just nice to know that when a fire happens in Somerville, it's not just Somerville that's responding. We do appreciate that. Thank you, sir.
Councilman Brady.
Yes, sir. As most of you know, we had a very successful but wet groundbreaking ceremony on Thursday for the long-awaited Emergency Services Complex. The tent held a very large number of people, and it was standing room only, and the event went on without a hitch in spite of the really bad weather that was out there. It goes to show that bad weather isn't a deterrent for good people, and we have a lot of good people there. And I want to thank Colin Driver and Kevin for bringing us up to this point and making it a really nice event. I think everybody had a good time. The food was good, and the speeches were short. Construction should begin in about 2 to 3 weeks. We're looking at maybe 12 to 15 months, so we'll be giving you updates, and you'll see those updates as you go by on Gaston Avenue. The sewer referendum is on the ballot for all those now who vote by mail. And one person asked me about the profit that New Jersey American Water will be making as a result of the sale of the sewer system. So I did a little fast checking there and compared it to what it would cost us in millions of dollars in bond capital and interest rates on the bonds, especially with the current interest rates. along with the cost for employees, 20% increase in health benefits, and it becomes obvious that local ownership of the sewers is not very profitable for the borough. The New Jersey American Water will freeze our rates for several years while paying us $7 million to buy the assets, these sewers, and almost $10 million in rehabilitation funding to keep the sewers working well. It's a good deal for the people of Somerville, and please vote for the referendum on November 8th. Finally, the planning board unanimously approved an application to cap the landfill, put solar panels on that property. It's a win-win for Somerville because we will get rental income from the solar panel company for 20 years, and they will cap it. Once they level it and grade it, then they'll put a cap over it, and that will meet our obligation to the Department of Environmental Protection, which insists that we cap the landfill. The solar panel company will provide reduced rates for low-income residents, and under the terms of the agreement, the solar panels will be there for 20 years. And that's all I have to report on it.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Shep.
Thank you. I'm reporting on the Environmental Commission's work this past month. As Tom Mitchell alluded to, there was a tremendous program. That program was the planting of the Salem oak, which was a descendant of the 600-year-old oak tree that finally died in down South Jersey. So anyway, we had the Salem oak. One of our members was nurturing it for a year until we could get permission to plant it at the Wallace House. But I want to publicly thank the Environmental Commission for taking that project on, especially Sandy Benscoter for nurturing the tree and making sure it got planted properly, as well as Jerry DeSapio, who wrote a poem and presented at the program, and most of all the Vanderveer School Chorus, who provided some music, and also the Girl Scouts for the flag ceremony at the event. So it's a nice little community event. Like Tom said, there was over 100 people there. So it was great not to just to put the tree in the ground, but to really celebrate. Speaking of trees, we have another tree event coming up on October 20th, so it's Friday if anyone's around during the day. In the morning, there's 40 trees being planted through a funded program in collaboration with the New Jersey Tree Foundation and MetLife, who's funding it. So we're grateful again. They provided us 2 years ago with 40 trees over at Fireman's Field. And these trees will try to help to stabilize the bank in the parkland of Lepp, and also to provide some shade for the very hot playground they have. So that's my report.
Thank you. I have no reports this evening. Moving on. At a meeting earlier this year, Councilman Brady suggested that we have a consultant speak to council regarding housing, and suggested Elizabeth McManus. We'd asked the administrator to make that arrangement. So we're pleased to have her with us this evening for a short presentation. Thank you. And if we could please be aware of her time. I know she has another meeting after this.
I didn't know if it was easy to come there or at the table.
I'll sit at the desk right now.
Hope you all wish for that new council chamber.
I don't know.
So hi everybody, my name is Stephanie McManus. I'm really pleased to be asked to come and talk to you folks. I'm a big advocate for just general municipal planning, good municipal planning policy, and also housing policy and good housing planning. So I heard from Kevin, you said you were interested in hearing, you're interested in, I would say, affordable housing and affordability, but not necessarily Mount Laurel only, but Superior Court compliance. So I put together a couple of slides in the form of a handout for you guys, just to try to provide some background information and to help lead us through a discussion. One of the things that you will notice in there is that there's a handful of slides, particularly towards the end, about Mount Laurel in general. And when I say Mount Laurel, I mean like Council on Affordable Housing. I'll go through this, but I'm happy to go through as much detail as I can tonight with you guys. But I'm gonna try to talk about affordable housing as a bigger picture and a bigger topic rather than just the strict Mount Laurel compliance. So I think that's what you're really interested in. So first and foremost, I just want to say, yes, my name is Beth, but also I'm a principal at Kyle McManus Associates, and we're just a sort of a small firm down in Hopewell, New Jersey, but I do a lot of work in this area, and as does my partner, Jim Kyle. Me in particular, I specialize in municipal planning and affordable housing and redevelopment. And I think what all of that means is, and I should say as part of that, I don't specialize in just municipalities that want to get a judgment of repose or want to go through that co-op process, but are really interested in housing policy and planning generally. So what I've done for you this evening is I started with a couple slides about just what is affordable housing, because I think that that is a term that's often confused in the state, just at its most basic level. So when we talk about affordable housing here in New Jersey, what that means is housing units that are restricted most often in the form of a deed restriction to households that are making 80% or less than median income. So, and that median income is based on a multi-county region, in your case a 3-county region, so 80% of that median income is considered affordable, but within that affordable definition, there are additional subcategories. So we have very low income at 30% or less than median income, low income at 50% or less than median income, and then up to 80%, that's the moderate income. And so what that means for you guys, if we just look at low income, a 3-person low-income household, because the maximum incomes are based on the number of people per household. As you might imagine, if you are a single parent with 4 kids, you're going to need more household income to sustain that family than you would be a single parent with just 1 child. So a 3-person household that is low income, the maximum income is $61,000. And so the first thing that strikes me when we talk about affordable housing in New Jersey is that the incomes are really not that low. I talk to a lot of folks that aren't familiar with affordable housing, and they think of affordable housing as sort of being the old HUD projects, housing and urban development projects that we've heard about and have, frankly, terrible reputations from the 1970s, 1980s. And though that is affordable housing, don't get me wrong, but it's sort of a different world than what you typically see here in New Jersey. And I say that because when we talk about affordable housing through pretty much any means of the private market, we're talking about moderate income, low income, and very low income. And importantly, in order to qualify for a low-income housing unit, you actually you need to show that your income can support the unit. And that's actually a little bit different than a lot of HUD-funded projects, which are simply basing their rents upon the income of the residents, as opposed to the residents needing their income to qualify for the unit. So it's a little bit different.
Beth, I'm going to move that microphone closer to you because someone on the other side of the camera just texted me and said they couldn't hear you that well.
Oh, okay.
And the great thing is you have a lot of people listening.
Well, that's good. And I'm going to try to speak up as well for everybody.
Thank you. Is that okay for you?
Yeah, it's fine. Okay. And so that's really what we mean when I talk about affordable housing. Yes, to the extent that you might receive money for a HUD project, they might have sort of the more traditional rents based upon income qualifications for the affordable housing units, but most of the affordable housing that we deal with in New Jersey, whether it's a private developer that's building it, or maybe it's a project that's receiving HMFA, the Housing Mortgage Finance Agency, funding through that agency, it's the more New Jersey-esque type of affordable housing in the sense that households need to qualify for their units. So it's a little bit different of a framework than I think some folks are familiar with. So at $61,000, what does that really translate? So it's going to depend on part the size of the unit, the number of people in their households, but I put a couple of examples in here. So what would the rent for an affordable unit be? For a 2-bedroom unit, for example, it would range between $900 and $1,600 generally, and that's a huge range, and that is because that range includes very low income households at 30%, all the way up to moderate income households at 80% of median income. And so I have examples here as well for 2-bedroom, well, 1, 2, and 3-bedroom for sale units as well. And so I wanted to give this to you just so folks have a good understanding about what is affordable housing when we talk about that. The next thing I wanted to talk about was the framework here in New Jersey. And so compliance with Mount Laurel, it is a choice that every municipality needs to make. There are benefits, there are upsides, and there are downsides to both. Very quickly, I think the biggest upside to working through this compliance process is very simply, you're immune from builder's remedy litigation. There's a type of litigation that is used as the stick, if you will, in our system of affordable housing here in New Jersey. It's a carrot and stick, with the stick being that you are eligible or potentially vulnerable to builder's remedy litigation. And that is simply a developer, most often a developer, but not always, most often a developer identifying a municipality that has not met its affordable housing obligation. They, through a court process, tell the court that they are so happy to help the municipality meet their affordable housing obligation that they will build a project that includes 15 or maybe 20% of the units that are affordable housing. And so those projects, let me back up. What that means is not only do they offer to build that project, it also means that through the court process, presuming the builder's remedy litigation is successful and the municipality has indeed not met its obligation, that means essentially that the municipality's zoning and master plan policies are irrelevant. So that means that the development could be located in a commercial zone. It means it could be developed in a single-family residential zone, presumably being multifamily or townhouses. And so it's a really, for a lot of communities, particularly those that feel like they have the market and the available land to attract developers interested in builder's remedy, it's a really strong incentive for compliance. I can't tell you exactly what that development would look like because they look different in every part of the state. What might happen in Bergen County is going to look very different from what happens in Salem County, for example. But in each instance, I think the characteristic that ties those projects together is that they are different than the municipality's vision for that particular property, and they are typically much more intense than what the municipality had envisioned for that site. So if it's a single-family residential zone, it might be, say, townhouses or multifamily apartments. It could be, instead of a single story or a couple stories of an office building, it could be a much larger multifamily building, as an example. And so that's the biggest incentive why municipalities comply. And there are a couple other incentives as well, but I think at the end of the day, the builder's remedy is the thing that's most important to municipalities that decide to engage in this process. I wanted to talk a little bit about, so now that I've given a little bit of a spiel on Mount Laurel and compliance, I want to talk a little bit about what else you guys can do and what municipalities that are interested in promoting affordable housing and promoting affordability can do in ways that might generate affordable housing credits and also ways that might not, and that would address the larger issue of affordability. And I've identified a handful of ideas for Somerville. I will say I have not vetted them against your zoning or your other policies. So while I put these together for Somerville, I say that simply because I'm appearing before you this evening, not because I can say specifically, this is a good idea for you guys, and I have vetted it and confirmed exactly how it should work. So, but some of the strategies I've listed include simply continuing the borough's existing Section 8 housing assistance program. That is one thing I was able to identify from your website. I know that you engaged in that. That's certainly providing affordable housing to households in this community already. Another item you can do is adoption of what's referred to as a mandatory set-aside ordinance. This is an ordinance that has come into fashion in a lot of communities during the recent third round court process, which generally started in 2015. And it's a general municipal-wide ordinance, and it states that where a rezoning occurs, where a redevelopment occurs, where the zoning board of adjustment grants a use variance for multifamily residential, or perhaps a density variance for multifamily residential, that a set-aside of affordable housing be imposed. So this does not require that the zoning board grant any approvals for that use variance that might come before them, and it doesn't require that all of you engage in the redevelopment that's been suggested. But it does state that if those actions occur, if the use variance is granted, if the rezoning or the redevelopment occurs for residential development, that portion of those units be set aside for affordable housing. And I would advise that for, I think, just about every municipality across the state, because it just simply gives you the ability to capture opportunities as they come up. It means that there may be sites and opportunities that you're not thinking of right now that may come to fruition in the future, and now you simply have this ordinance on the books. It gives the zoning board of adjustment, importantly, the ability to enforce it rather than ask for it from the developer. And then I will say for all of you, the upside or the downside, depending on how you look at it, it also has the same impact on council actions as well. Because where you do that rezoning for multifamily or even townhouse development, depending on how the ordinance is structured, you already have an ordinance on the books that says that rezoning, for example, must include an affordable housing set aside. So depending on your perspective of this topic, it is perhaps a good thing or perhaps a limiting thing for you. So as I said, I always recommend a mandatory set-aside ordinance. Another action that a municipality can consider, particularly one with an existing apartment housing stock in town, is you can consider rent control. I can't tell you that it's easy or that it's not controversial, but it is an option. I will say that rent control does not create affordable housing units that are restricted to 80% or less than median income. What it does is slow the trend of rising rents. So it's, some people might say it's little a affordability rather than capital A affordability with a deed restriction in place. If you don't do a mandatory set-aside ordinance, you can consider an affordable housing set-aside anytime you engage in a rezoning or redevelopment. I would certainly recommend that. I know that there's been quite a bit of redevelopment that has already happened in town. To the extent that more opportunities exist, I would recommend that you consider how you can incorporate some affordable housing there. You can also work with your existing housing stock to convert existing market rate units or maybe vacant or abandoned units to affordable housing. There might be opportunities to perhaps purchase an existing unit, bring it up to code, and then resell it to a household that is low or moderate income qualified. The municipality can also partner with an affordable housing developer, and that might be a developer that produces larger apartment buildings, such as those that are funded by HMFA, between maybe 50 and 100 units. But it can also be much smaller organizations that are interested in creating 1 or maybe 2 units of affordable housing units, perhaps from some of those market rate or vacant buildings that I mentioned before. And I also want to note that especially for the partnership program, it's not just housing, affordable housing units that might be available to families, but also those for seniors and for those with special needs, such as those with developmental disabilities. The municipality can also consider incorporating what's now trending. The term is missing middle housing. So the missing middle is really smaller housing units that have largely been outlawed in a lot of communities. So just about every community permits single-family detached housing and maybe apartments, but there's a whole range of unit types in the middle, such as duplexes, 2 and 3 or 4 unit buildings. I know Somerville has these already, but there might be additional opportunities for you to amend the zoning or target certain areas to allow for these additional housing types. Next, we have a rehabilitation program where you're working with perhaps the county. The county runs a housing rehabilitation program. To have that program, or perhaps an expanded program if the borough is so inclined, to bring existing housing units that are at substandard levels and occupied by households that qualify for low or moderate income. You bring them up to code through a rehabilitation service, and as a result of receiving that service, the homeowner would place a deed restriction on the unit for 10 years. And essentially for that 10-year period, if they were to sell the home, they would either, depending on how the program is structured, either pay back the rehabilitation cost or perhaps be obligated to sell it to a low or a moderate income household. And then the last item I wanted to recommend is to adopt affordable housing regulating documents. If you select any option now or in the future that is intended to create a big A, so to speak, affordable housing units, I strongly recommend that you adopt regulating documents. And the reason why I say this is, to the extent that Somerville decides to create affordable housing units, whether it's through any of these programs, whether it's a mandatory set-aside ordinance, a future redevelopment, partnership with a nonprofit that wants to create affordable housing units, it is in your best interest to ensure those units are eligible for credit against your affordable housing obligation. One thing I would hate to see for this town or any community is that you go through the effort to create affordable housing. You do so to perhaps not to meet your whole obligation, but to meet some of it, that which you were comfortable doing so. And later, maybe you're subject to a builder's remedy litigation, or perhaps you decide to enter the process later, and you believe that you have this bank of affordable housing units, only to find out later that none of them are eligible for credit against your obligation. And quite frankly, that is easy to do. There are a lot of communities that are in that boat. And that's because of a number of reasons, but I could say, for example, that maybe the affordable units only had a 20-year deed restriction. Affordable housing units are required to have 30 years. So if it doesn't have that 30 years, it may not be eligible for credit. Or perhaps all of your affordable housing units are one-bedroom units. Not all of those units would be eligible for credit because you're required to create 1, 2, and 3-bedroom units. Similarly, maybe all the units are moderate income. You don't have any very low or low income units. And so in order to avoid that type of a scenario, I really recommend that if you're going to engage with any affordable housing program that you would hope to get credit for those units, I recommend that you put the standards in place so that you know ahead of time what you're asking your developers to do, and importantly, so that your zoning board, so that your planning board knows what conditions to put in place. And lastly, it gives the developers that you might be hoping to, that will provide affordable housing, it gives them the benefit of understanding what's going to be required of them in order to complete the process. So I think that a regulating ordinance, and there's some other documents depending on what direction you go, would be a great idea. I would, especially if you're going to couple that with a mandatory set-aside ordinance, I think those are 2 items that can move together, because not quite the worst case scenario, but you'd like to avoid zoning board issuing an approval for, let's say, a D variance, and they're required to create for affordable housing units, but then there's no standards in place to make sure that the developer does those units correctly. So you can simply avoid that problem by having the standards on the books. Let's see. The other thing that the town, to the extent that you're not sure about this process, you might want to engage your planner and ask them to work on a housing plan and just simply evaluate the challenges before you. To what extent do you need affordable housing? To what extent do you have opportunities to create it? And what recommendations would flow from there? I'm sure that's something they would be happy to help with, but it might be a good opportunity for this community to think comprehensively about housing in general and really what makes sense for you at this juncture. So I have a lot more information in here. I have a ton more information in my head. I would love to see if you have any questions and see if there are any additional directions you want me to take this.
I haven't been doing this very long, so you have to forgive my ignorance, but I'm not aware that we have had, Somerville has an affordable housing mandate. I don't know if that's true or not, but what incentive do we have to do this, given the fact that we have about 30% of our property is tax exempt, hospitals, churches, schools, yada, yada, yada. We have several homeless shelters. We have group homes for special people. We're pretty well built out, and I honestly have to say, really, we're pretty well built out. We've got some swampland that we can put up on sticks. So what's our incentive here? Why would we even think about doing this?
Okay, so I want to answer that question, but first, let me say, yes, Somerville has an affordable housing obligation. Every town in this, just about every town in our state has an affordable housing obligation. Now, exactly what yours is, there's been no court that has made that determination, but there are estimates out there. I can go through those with you guys, but I don't want folks to think that this community doesn't have an affordable housing obligation that somebody might decide to enforce. That said, why would you do this given that you don't have, I think in part, you really don't have a lot of developable land available. And that's a very fair concern. But I will say that builder's remedy litigation is not limited to just greenfield properties or undeveloped land. It could very easily be somebody that has an existing, perhaps commercial property. They feel that the profit margin would be greater if they did an inclusionary development on it. Inclusionary is defined as a mix of market rate and affordable units. And so if Somerville does not have a plan in place that meets its affordable housing obligation, you are very likely going to, if a developer institutes that litigation, you are very likely going to be found that you have not met your obligation and that you will be eligible for that builder's remedy litigation. And that means that essentially the municipality loses control over its zoning for that particular property, not across the entire community. But if a developer comes in, they own 1 acre of land, then they would, I'm really simplifying here, but they would presumably say to Somerville, hey, we're interested in building 25 housing units on this acre of land. And you guys might say, thanks, but no thanks. We really think this is better suited for commercial development. And the developer might say, I think you are incorrect, and take his case to court. I hate to say it, but I would expect their opening litigation to not be that 25 units. It might be 35, it might be 50 units, because oftentimes there are settlements and things get negotiated down. But that's the biggest downside to not engaging in this process, that you're vulnerable to that type of litigation. The other benefits are, along those same lines, you have certainty that your zoning is what that you have the ability to dictate your zoning, you have the ability to dictate your own vision, as opposed to a developer or developers doing that for you. And then additionally, if you engage in this process, to the extent the borough is interested, you're allowed to collect development fees from developers. You're allowed to collect up to 1.5% development fee from residential developers, 1.5% of their equalized assessed value. So if somebody comes in, builds, let's say, an apartment building without affordable housing, you can collect money for them. You can collect it on development of single-family homes. That's up to the municipality. Some towns do, some towns don't. The borough is presumably collecting the non-residential development fee right now. That's a state-imposed development fee, but you're required to send it to the state if you're not involved in this affordable housing process. So you would be able to keep that money. Now, the real advantage to that is if you want to use it to create affordable housing, because that's the only permitted use of it. But without engaging in this process, you're not permitted to collect those funds and use it for the creation of affordable housing. So I would say the biggest advantages are elimination of builder's remedy litigation and the resulting control that comes with that, and being able to collect money for affordable housing programs to the extent you'd like to.
Now, you said about collecting money, which was my next question. What was the economic or tax impact on it? Because right now, we have agreements with many of our redevelopers that pay a pilot, and that's what's sustaining this borough, to be honest with you. I would not want to jeopardize that for some basically social programs that are going to interfere with that. What do we do about the, a developer comes in and builds an apartment complex, okay? Normally, we would get between 10, 12, and 15% of pilot. 1% is nothing. So what do we do with these affordable housing units as far as taxing them?
They're taxed just like any other, if it's a multifamily project with say 20% of the units are affordable, it's taxed, or it would have the same type of pilot arrangement that it would for all market rate units. But I will say the value of the project is going to reflect the fact that 20% of those units are below market. So in a more simple example where you have, let's say, a single family home with an assessed value of $300,000 because it's at market rate, you're going to collect your $300,000 worth of tax revenue on it. If you have an affordable unit with a value of $90,000, for example, you're only going to collect tax revenue reflecting that $90,000 value.
But you can still have a pilot agreement with them.
100%,
Because
absolutely.
I was led to believe by some people that if a nonprofit comes in and puts it in, it's like it's free land, and that is something that we would be very unhappy with.
Well, oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes nonprofit developers doing affordable housing enter into pilot arrangements with the municipality. That's typical for larger projects. To the extent that a developer, a nonprofit comes in to say, operate a group home or open up a handful of affordable units, that might not be the case, but it's very typical to have a developer, a nonprofit developer enter into a pilot arrangement when they're building a multifamily apartment building, for example.
Are group homes and that kind of thing count toward affordable housing?
Very often, yes.
So even if it was retroactive?
Yeah, the way that it typically works is you would identify the group home providers, ask a series of questions to make sure, most group homes are eligible for affordable housing credits. You would ask a series of questions to make sure they fall within those categories, and then from there determine what type of affordability controls are in place. Usually they have a funding agreement from the state, and that says essentially in exchange for this money you commit to being in this ground for say 20 years, and that qualifies them for affordable housing credit. And there are some other tools that you can do,
so
use to be flexible with
permutations
them.
to that. Like we have a large senior citizen project which is affordable. It's a HUD development.
Yep.
If we were Borough Hall, I'll show it to you. That would qualify, presumably.
It very well may.
Did you say that though it had to be deeded to get credit for it?
Deed restricted.
Deed restricted.
It's either, typically, a deed restriction is most common, but a lot of state or federal government funded projects, maybe it's a HUD project, perhaps, or senior project, or a lot of group homes, they often have funding agreements in place that that qualify, and so you don't need that complementary deed restriction. The funding restriction does it.
Have school systems shown a significant increase in kids as a result of affordable housing? Because that's one of the big, okay, I have to tell you, with a almost 30% nonprofit that don't pay school taxes, there are some of us here who don't have kids who pay school taxes. And that's a more sensitive issue. So when voters go to the polls, they may like our mandate or they may like our plan, but they may not like us if they think, and every time I talk to someone, oh, you got to put all kids in those apartments. What happens in these towns that have large affordable housing components? Because families moved in, I assume. School systems are, is there any help for that kind of thing?
I would love to say yes, and I wish the state did a better job of incentivizing their communities to plan for families, but unfortunately they don't. I am sure in some locations they have had an increase in school children. There's simply no way around it when you're building, depending on the community, perhaps hundreds of housing units to meet your affordable housing obligation. How a municipality meets it can have really significant impact, meets their obligation, can have really significant impacts on the number of additional school kids. For example, building, this is a very general statement, but building townhouses typically generate more school children than 1 and 2 bedroom apartments. Or you can build 100% affordable housing developments, and so you're limiting your new housing units to just the affordable units. That would certainly reduce the school children. Municipalities can maximize their ability to use senior housing and special needs to meet their obligation, although there are limitations. And so there are a variety of tools that you can use to reduce the school children generation, but I can't say that that in any community is going to be able to eliminate that as a possibility.
It seems as if putting this package together would be a little on the costly side. You know, even the, what you call it, the mandatory set-aside ordinance, I don't think this is something we just draft with Kevin and Jeremy over the weekend and bingo, it goes through. Have you any idea of how much this entails? It sounds like it's an awful lot of work before you even put the shovel on the ground.
Well, I think it depends on if you told me you wanted to adopt a housing plan and you wanted to go through the Mount Laurel process, I would say yes, that is an expensive and timely process, 100%. If you tell me you just want to adopt a mandatory set-aside ordinance and do an affordable housing regulating ordinance, so to create, capture those opportunities and make sure the units are administered properly, it's not that much work.
And that's not retroactive then.
No,
so we're not
no,
going
no.
after existing development. So
No, there's really no opportunity to deal with projects that have already received approval, much less are already in the ground. But those are simple ordinances for which there are a variety of examples that could be provided, and you guys could craft it in a way that makes the most sense for you guys. I'm sure there would be a time and a cost component, but it is far different than even just considering a housing plan.
does that change the master plan, the redevelopment plans, and how much work does the zoning officer have to do on something like that?
The mandatory set-aside ordinance has no impact on your master plan because it doesn't dictate changes to land use. All it says is if you do certain changes to land use, like that D-variance, like that redevelopment, then it should include an affordable housing set-aside, but it doesn't dictate housing type or zoning density, anything along those lines.
The typical set-aside you said was 1.5%?
Typical affordable housing set-aside is 20%. So 100 units, 20 affordable units, maybe 15 units. Set-asides are typically either 20% across both for sale or for rent, or perhaps a lot, communities will do 15% set-aside for rental units and 20% set-aside for sale units.
We're mostly rental in this town.
Yeah.
Could a set-aside ordinance have the ability to be negotiated, like having an ordinance that it's a negotiated amount?
A developer can.
Because I'm just trying to think that
If you're, yes, with qualification. I'm sorry, much like just about every topic in affordable housing, it's never an easy answer. So yes, with qualification. For municipalities that have gone through the court process and they have a court order that says this town shall adopt a mandatory set-aside ordinance that says A, B, and C, in that instance, I would say no. I think you're in danger of potentially violating your court order. For a town that decides to do a mandatory set-aside ordinance simply because you think that this makes sense for you, I would ultimately defer to legal, but I do think that, yes, you have the ability to negotiate, and I think that the zoning board would likely have the ability to address a developer request for a lower set aside at their public hearing.
You mention court order all the time. Who does, why? I mean, are we gonna get served next week? I mean.
No, I'm not trying to,
Everything seems to be court order, and I don't honestly have a lot of faith in the courts because it's New Jersey. So what does one do to, I mean, I wouldn't mind doing something if it was for the public good, but I don't want to kick myself in the butt and to have the court come around. Who's the court and how does that work?
okay, so in New Jersey, I promise I won't do the whole history of Mount Laurel, but back in 1975, we had this court decision, New Jersey Supreme Court, and it's referred to as the Mount Laurel 1 decision. Very generally says municipalities have an obligation to provide for a variety of housing types in their zoning. There were several court cases later. Eventually, in 1985, we had the Fair Housing Act adopted by our New Jersey State Legislature. That Fair Housing Act did a lot of things. It talked generally about how municipal affordable housing obligations should be crafted. And then, importantly for your question, it created the Council on Affordable Housing, COA. And COA did its job for quite a while, roughly 1985 through 1989. They adopted rules, they issued affordable housing obligation, they reviewed and approved municipalities' plans for housing plans at no cost, aside from the municipal professionals. And it worked, it's less than perfect, but it worked pretty well. All of that went off the rails, if you don't mind me saying, in about 1999. And that really that was the start of the third round. COA made efforts to adopt new rules. They were overturned by the courts. That happened multiple times. They ultimately just simply failed at adopting third round rules. In 2015, we as in the state, had a motion made to the New Jersey Supreme Court by Fair Share Housing Center. And they essentially said to the court, it is time for the court to take jurisdiction and perhaps force the state to do its job through the Council on Affordable Housing, or to identify an alternative path for municipalities, essentially. And the court, given our separation of powers, didn't have the ability to put COA back in action, put it back to work. And so instead they said essentially, okay, municipalities, you may no longer rely on your state agency to adopt rules, determine municipal housing obligations, and review and approve housing plans. Instead, all of this must be done through Superior Court. And that created a system that was actually very similar to what was going on before the Fair Housing Act. And that chaos that occurred in the 80s is why we have the Fair Housing Act. Now we sort of have it again. I would like to think it's better managed, but quite honestly, it wasn't around then. And so now municipalities, if you want to get that protection from builder's remedy, don't call COA, don't send them anything. They literally cannot look at it. Instead, you have to engage the court process. You have to file a declaratory judgment, which is sort of like raising your hand to the court and saying, I want to comply. And you work through that court's process with Fair Share Housing Center because they are essentially an automatic litigant because of their participation in the case at the Supreme Court. You work with them to whatever extent suits you best, I'll say it in that way, to identify your affordable housing obligation and to sort through how it is that you will meet it. And then the court reviews and approves your housing element and fair share plan. And so for that reason, that's why you keep hearing me say the court order, etc. It's because the only way that we can work through this process is by going through that court route, because unfortunately we just don't have a state agency to help us anymore.
So what you're saying is now we have two devils to deal with. We have the builders, who at least are doing something for the town, and we have the courts, who are doing something for fair share housing. So I'm just wondering which devil I want to do business with.
Well, I would say, I'm not sure the perspective on the developer doing something for the town probably depends on the developer and depends on the town. And I work for developers, so I don't want to malign all of them, but the reality is that sometimes municipalities are pleased to see a particular developer's project and sometimes not.
But they still have to meet the same criteria for building that everybody else does. They have to meet the same codes.
Oh, the building code, yes.
So,
That
in
can
other
never
words,
be
you're not
eliminated.
going to get substandard housing put in
never.
there.
Never.
If you go through the courts, you're going to get, you don't know what.
You would, if you go through the courts, all building codes, plumbing codes, electric codes, all of those must be met under all circumstances. And no case that I can think of had they been waived. Working through the court process, municipalities have wildly different experiences, quite honestly. I think some towns have felt that this worked well, the process went smoothly, and they got out with limited pain, if you will. Other municipalities, I can tell you, have quite the opposite experience. So it really depends on the characteristics of the municipality, the characteristics and the personalities, if you will, of the folks governing, and probably some other factors as well.
If the borough was just to do a set-aside ordinance, they wouldn't have to work through the courts to do that, they would just do it, right?
No, and so that's why I've tried to identify, yes, you guys can go through the court process and have this big to do, but I think there are, if you're interested in just starting to address this in smaller ways that you're comfortable with, I think you can do a mandatory set-aside ordinance, you can do some regulatory documents, you can take a couple other steps that don't require court approval.
And the set-aside, I mean, I apologize, Council President, sorry, and this is my last question. But if you do a set-aside, you had raised those categories earlier on with low, moderate, and low, moderate, and moderate. Could they do a set-aside and say, we're gonna do just this category in this development? Like, it's really, or are you not gonna, is it not gonna get credit qualified later on?
So I'm in favor of, if you told me that we can do all moderate income or we can do nothing at all, I would say do the moderate income. Because at least you're reserving housing units for at least some folks that are below median income. But the reality is, if you're in court, for whatever reason, whether you filed or you got builder's remedy, you're in the fourth round, or you're before COA in the future, when they come back. If you tell the reviewing agency, hey, we have 10 affordable housing units and they're all moderate income, I think the answer is going to be, okay, great, what are you going to do to fix that imbalance? The imbalance being you should have had one or maybe two very low income, 3 low income, and then only 5 moderate income. So what are you going to do to fix the imbalance? Or maybe there's a scenario where only a portion of the units get credit as opposed to all 10, but typically it's a matter of finding a way to correct the imbalance.
Really, Councilman Mitchell, any questions?
Yeah, I was wondering, are there published criteria that we have to meet, or is this, you make it sound like it's very nebulous?
No, there's quite a bit of published criteria, and I guess I'm trying not to get into the details of it, but in order to have a unit be eligible for credit, there are advertising requirements, there are rental or sale price requirements, there are administration requirements in terms of how much monthly housing costs, to what extent housing costs can be a percentage of a person's income. So there are unit requirements, there are development requirements, making sure that that particular development has the right mix of, if it's a family project, for example, 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units, whether it's the right mix of very low, moderate income units, and then within your affordable housing obligation as a whole, there are additional requirements as well. So for example, not more than 25% of a municipality's affordable housing obligation can be met with senior units. So I'm not trying to 25%? 25%, yeah.
Okay.
So I I'm trying not to get bogged down in the details, because quite honestly, I could talk to you about the unit requirements, the project requirements, or even the obligation requirements could probably be a meeting in and of itself. Unfortunately, this is complicated stuff, which is
But
my
now,
problem.
I've been told, is it correct that the criteria is you can charge up to 1/3 of a person's income as rent?
Yes, that's generally correct. In order to qualify for an affordable housing unit, the household has to show that their income, that the rent or the mortgage will not exceed 30% of their monthly income.
30%.
Yeah, 30%.
Councilman Wu?
I just want to thank you for coming out this evening. There's a lot for us to talk about and for us to go through. I think that there's been some confusion at this table in the past, and I think that this is helping us to really see some variety of ways that we can treat our situation. So I thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
I'd like to take a moment to open this up to the public. I move that we open it up to the public.
Second.
Second.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Councilman Brady,
Yes.
Tom Mitchell,
Yes.
Gina Stravic,
Yes.
Roger Brown.
Yes.
Randy Pitts.
Yes. To be respectful of her time, I ask everyone, just, let's keep it brief, possibly one question at most. And please come up, state your name, ask your question.
Somerville, Bermuda Drive, Branchford. I want to thank you so much because I can't speak as well as you, but I get it. But what are we going to do about all this? And I'm so glad that she brought up many points that I could not convey as best as she did. But we need that. We tired of cosmetic work out with the senior buildings and all these little houses we sick of. We just want a decent place to live. And I don't know what devil's side I want to be on, none. But I do want to be on the people's side. Okay?
John Hoffman, 23 North Lawton Ave. I've been following this stuff for quite some time now. I don't understand why Somerville is so perplexed about the affordable housing issue. They are going on around us in Bridgewater, Branchburg. Your prime developer, Mr. Morris, is doing them in Hillsborough over there by Adrian Drive. He's meeting parking requirements, getting affordable housing in there and everything else. The other thing that really perplexes me is the simple fact. Go on the Borough website. Everybody that has a question, look under affordable housing. It says garden apartments. Under that, it has all the guidelines already that they are not following. There are affordable guidelines in place for garden apartments, which they are were trying to eliminate last November, if you recall, with spot zoning while increasing campaign contributions, if you recall that. Those two ordinances were brought forth. Okay, thank you. Thank you for your time. Yeah, hit that hammer. That's good. I'm not done yet.
I ask, if you have a question, out of respect for her time. Questions only, please.
Is it comments or questions? I thought it was a motion for public comments.
Questions.
So the question is about what she
Comments we'll take when we open it up to the public.
Is this material available or is this slideshow available to the public? I didn't get a copy. I don't know if there's any.
I'm going to defer to the borough on
It'll be available. And then is there any website or sources that you recommend for the public if they wish to organize or to do anything collaboratively, or does your firm offer any services to the public or engage with any community organizations to help disseminate some of this information, which is very valuable, but of course it's very legalese, and I think that even the board by their own admission or the council by their own admission has acknowledged a certain confusion in the past, which is fine, we're all here to learn. I was wondering if you know of any of these resources or if your consultant practice offers any liaison with that regard.
So I think a couple places for resources I would recommend Notwithstanding the fact that the state agency is defunct, the Council on Affordable Housing has a lot of information about history and what the applicable rules are. It will not necessarily get you out of the legalese, but it might give you some of the detail if you're craving it. You might also want to look for at Fair Share Housing Center's website. There might also be some legalese there, but they'll give you more of the legal history of the Mount Laurel Doctrine. You can also look at the Housing and Community Development Network. I think that that would be a good website to look up. I believe they have some guidance documents. And then the Affordable Housing Professionals of New Jersey. It's a professional organization, but they list a lot of firms, both developers and administrators of affordable housing that operate in this world. And I think there's also information on that website, or perhaps at a minimum links to other resources. And then my firm, I really don't do that type of work. I do obviously, maybe not obviously, I do a lot of work for municipalities. I do some work for developers and other categories as well, but I don't typically do, I'm not sure community engagement efforts on behalf of residents.
Sure. The final question, we often hear that this is complicated or complex or a lot, and I think that it's just like anything that's new, right? We have to just grapple with it and we learn. Construction can be complex, flood rezoning can be complex, everything can be complex. But in your experience, have you seen towns that are similarly situated to Somerville have success with affordable housing, either programs or ordinances, such as the ones that you recommended?
Absolutely. There are towns of all shapes and sizes out there that have had success. It doesn't mean that the success came easy, but
Sure.
Yes, there are examples out there.
Towns like Somerville have had success with some of what you recommended?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Anyone else? I move to close the public session. I move to close the public. Second.
Hi.
My name is Elizabeth Sanchez. And when you was talking about, when his question was, Somerville having affordable housing, and he was saying that they didn't have it. Well, in the 80s, we were told that we had certain property here in Somerville for affordable housing. And it was in one of the council meetings where they bought building all these apartments over by the train station. Well, that's the property where affordable housing was supposed to be built. Then somebody took it off the books to where it didn't happen because we wasn't coming to the council meetings. You know, we're thinking that this committee is going to do the right thing by the people here in Somerville. And I work every day. I didn't have time to come and do this because I'm worried about raising kids, keeping a job, keeping a roof over my head. So I'm thinking the committee is going to do the right thing by us. When I lost my job, that's when I had time to listen and find out all of the propaganda that people are doing to hinder us from getting affordable housing. Now, our family been here for years. My great uncle found the Hobbs tax. So taxes been coming out our family for years. But we have nothing to show for what we had. We had the armory. They tore that down in the 90s. Okay? So the question is, you're saying that they are obligated to build affordable housing here in Somerville.
So let me be very clear about the terminology. Every town has, and now I hear your question, it's an unfortunate term, but every town has an obligation, an affordable housing obligation. However, municipalities are not obligated to engage in this process. They are incentivized to engage through this process. Towns are incentivized through not, if they engage, they go through the court process, it means they are not vulnerable to those builders' remedy litigation. They are not required to go through the process, but if they do, they get a big benefit. So every town has an obligation, but you're not required to meet that obligation proactively. If that.
Okay,
Yeah.
so what if people have property
Mhm.
and they want to build affordable housing on their property? Is that possible?
Affordable housing is not,
How much land do you have to build affordable housing?
so an affordable housing unit is just like any regular housing type. You could have an affordable single-family home that could be constructed on a single-family property without variances, without special municipal approval. Just like if you had let's say an apartment complex zone, you could build an apartment complex that was all or maybe partial affordable housing units without variance, as long as it met the existing zoning. And so, to the extent that municipal or developers want to build housing that is not otherwise permitted in the zoning, that's when variance relief or redevelopment, rezoning would be necessary. But it's to permit that housing type, not the fact that it is just simply affordable. That said, most of the time, if you're going to build affordable housing, developers typically seek higher densities because you're making less money, because some portion of those units are going to be sold or rented at below market rate. So you create, typically you see a developer that creates a larger project, more units in order to make up for that loss of revenue.
Thank you very much.
We have a motion and a second to close public.
Yeah. Council members Granville Brady,
Yes?
Tom Mitchell,
Yeah,
Gina Stravic,
Yes.
Roger Vroom,
Yes.
Randy Pitts.
Yes. We'd like to thank you for your time.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Yeah. Good luck, folks.
Thank you for coming.
Gina, Gina, love you.
We have a few ordinances for introduction. Starting with ordinance 2686-22-1017, amending ordinance number 2588-19-1007, rules and regulations section of ordinance 2575-19-0603, ordinance 973, ordinance 232, sorry for the numbers, ordinance 2431-14-0218, regulating the towing of motor vehicles and establishing penalties for violations thereof, raising the fees for storage and towing of vehicles. I need a motion.
So,
second.
council members, council members Tom Mitchell,
Yeah,
Gina Stravic,
Yes.
Roger Vroom,
Yes.
Randy Pitts.
Yes. Introduction for ordinance 2687-22-1017, amending chapter 166, section 51, schedule X, entitled Yield Intersections, to delete North Middle on the intersection of Prospect Street and North Middle, and to amend chapter 166, section 50, schedule 9, entitled Stop Intersections, to include North Middle on the intersection of Prospect Street and North Middle. I need a motion.
so moved.
Second. Council members Tom Mitchell,
Yeah,
Gina Stravic,
Yes.
Roger Vroom.
Yes.
Randy Pitts.
Yes.
Just a comment, this is converting a yield sign into a stop sign
Correct.
at that intersection.
Ordinance 2688-22, amending chapter 166, section 46.1, entitled Schedule VA Parking Permit to include Second Street and Third Street from South Bridge Street to Hamilton Street. I need a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Council members Tom Mitchell.
Yes,
Gina Stravic.
Yes.
Roger Vroom.
Yes.
Randy Pitts.
Yes. Ordinance 2689, creating chapter 164 in the Borough Code entitled Vacant and Abandoned Properties. I need a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Council members Tom Mitchell.
yes,
Gina Stravic.
Yes.
Roger Vroom.
Yes.
Randy Pitts.
Yes. Ordinance number 2690, amending chapter 80 entitled Fire Prevention. Life Safety, section 7DC, entitled Waivers from Local Permit and Registration Fees to include the downtown Somerville Alliance. Any motion?
So moved.
Second.
Council members Granville Brady.
Yes.
Tom Mitchell.
yes,
Gina Stravic.
Yes.
Roger Vroom.
Yes.
Randy Pitts.
Yes. Ordinances for public hearing and adoption. Ordinance number 2685-22-1003, amending chapter 166-44, schedule 3, entitled No Stopping or Standing, to include section of Mountain Avenue on the east side of Mountain Avenue. Need a motion to open the public hearing?
so moved,
Second.
Second.
Council members Granville Brady.
Yes.
Tom Mitchell.
Yes.
Gina Stravic.
Yes.
Roger Vroom.
Yes.
Randy Pitts.
Yes. Any comments for the public
just
hearing?
a comment, this is, we talked about this at last meeting. Already marked off as no parking zone, but needs to have an ordinance to be enforceable.
It does eliminate one total parking space in all those things, in all those adjustments. We coordinated this with the high school as well.
Yeah.
They're aware.
They're aware, yeah.
No public? Need a motion to close public?
So moved.
Second.
Council members Granville Brady.
Yes.
Tom Mitchell.
Yes.
Gina Stravic.
Yes.
Roger Vroom.
Yes.
Randy Pitts.
Yes.
We need a,
Vote to approve.
That vote to approve?
Or adopt.
So moved. Move to adopt.
Second?
Council members Granville Brady.
Yes.
Tom Mitchell.
yes,
Gina Stravic.
Yes.
Roger Vroom.
Yes.
Randy Pitts.
Yes. Resolution for roll call vote. Resolution number 22-1017-314, approving playground development for property known as 134 Fairview Avenue on block 50, lots 13 and 14, as part of the 40 Haynes redevelopment, LLC Planning Board application number 2017-007P.
Move to accept.
Second?
Council members Granville Brady.
Yes.
Tom Mitchell.
yes,
Gina Stravic.
Yes.
Roger Vroom.
Yes.
Randy Pitts.
Yes. Any comments or questions from council?
I would
That
just
was
comment,
That was vote.
That was the vote.
It was the vote.
Sorry, change mine to no, please.
You're voting no on this.
I'm voting no on this.
Yeah, it still passes 4-1.
was this open for public comment?
No, this
No.
is a resolution that there was some discussion about previously. The council has provided the background on this, and the board resolution just requires the governing body to approve the.
Oh, okay, so it's just a resolution, not an ordinance.
It's an affirmation.
Yeah, the reason it was a roll call was there was at least one member that was objecting to it, so I didn't want to put it on the consent agenda and just have you pull it off, so.
This time, we'd like to open to the public.
Motion
Need
to
a
open?
motion?
Second,
Councilmembers Granville Brady,
Yes.
Tom Mitchell,
yes.
Gina Stravic.
Yes.
Roger Groom.
Yes.
Randy Pitts.
Yes. Open the meeting to the public. Please keep your comments to at least 5 minutes. Respectfully.
John Hoffman, 23 North Ought Ave. I kind of got moved to come here from the gentleman that was here at the last meeting that got over 15 minutes to speak and got to speak a second time. I think everybody should get that kind of respect. Anyway, like I said about the affordable housing, it's going on all around us. Affordable housing, stormwater management, all kinds of stuff that Somerville doesn't follow. I mean, Somerville's so bad. Do you know, does the stormwater treatment plant now stop you people from ejecting raw sewage into the Raritan? I've lived here about 8 years at this point. I lived here back in the 70s. I have stacks of articles and stuff on this town, what's been going on the last 8 years. As I said before, there's an ordinance in place for affordable housing with all the guidelines for garden apartments already in town, but nobody knows about that. They skirt everything that's good. You could plainly see that some council people do not want affordable housing. They are totally against it. Let me give you some numbers on these pilots. Okay, the Edge paid $450,000. That's the whole block. That's the whole 13 acres. $450,000. That's ShopRite. That's everything. Anyway, they paid $450,000. That is representative of 10% of the gross revenue. The pilots start out at 10%, they go to 12%, then they go to 15%. You get an average of 12% over the length of the pilot, most of which are 30 years. So, you got $450,000 out of that. What is that? That's 10% of Mr. Morris's gross revenue. $4.5 million. That means $4.1 million left Somerville. Meanwhile, we're worried about bonding for sewers. Did we have a problem or a vote on bonding for the $7 million private parking debt for a developer? Was there any problem with that? I didn't see that. Also, people might not know, the ShopRite project was funded by taxpayers. Mr. Morris received $13 million of taxpayer money, $6 million and another $7 million. And you can't even tell me that parking debt cost $7 million to build. There was a deal with the devil made. Okay? And like I said, in last November, spot rezoning for one developer and in the same breath, increasing campaign donations. There's something real rotten in Denmark here and nobody's calling anybody out on it. Now, I read something about the public safety building. You know, this pilot money is not free money. This is to provide these tenants with services. The average apartment will give it $2,500 a month. You know how much a year that is? That's $30,000 a year. 10%, you get $3,000. Okay? You get $3,000 for that apartment. The average homeowner, $274,000 assessment, is paying $11,000. It's not even close. We will never see tax relief. All anybody worth, look at, they just reduced a reduced payment because they ran into contaminated soil. I had a call on that. I called the DEP today on that site, and I called the County Board of Health. The PCB contaminated dirt is uncovered, blowing around, getting rinsed down storm drains. There's standing water 1 foot to 2 feet deep behind the building. The place is a mess, but we feel bad for them because they bought a property. Now, these are going to be rental townhomes. Remember, those are the ones that get all the kids and their pilots. Okay? All of this stuff, there's a big problem in Somerville, too. Okay? Now, you're going to cut me off. So I'm looking at the people because I know these people don't care. Your census in 2010 was 12,098 people after 10 years and millions of dollars in redevelopment. Bonded money for private developers. You know how much the population increased by 2020? 248 people. You're driving people out. Does anybody know when Somerville was in its heyday? 1970. 13,652 people. Do you think we had all in a 32 cops? You think we had all of these six-figure salary people in the town hall back in 1970 when we had almost 14,000 people? Now we only have 12? No, we didn't have none of that. There's a whole lot of squandering here. Them pilots aren't even paying for themselves, and that money is gone before it's even thought of. The public safety building, which is $31.5 million. Can somebody tell me out? I read somewhere in the lease you can buy it out at some point. Do you know what the term of this thing is? It's a 40-year deal. It ends up being $67.5 million. Now, that's an empty building. You've got to pay for a fit out on that thing. Now, the fit out for the Civic Center with their concrete podium that they can hide behind so they don't get shot while we have folding chairs is costing $500,000. This public safety building, that's a 4,000 square foot room with 4 folding chairs and some electronic equipment.
Mr. Hoffman, respectfully.
I know, I don't get 15 minutes like other people. Anyway, I'm coming here because they also censor me from social media and other pages.
Mr. Hoffman.
I will be back more.
Thank you. Pardon?
Good evening, Artie Deere, 81 Center Street. About 2 weeks ago, my wife, as the commander of the American Legion Post, allowed the borough to have an open house on the referendum. When it was over, we kind of ganged up on Mr. Saluka and talking about some of the problems in our neighborhood. It's on the agenda tonight for an ordinance for restricting parking on South Bridge, 2nd Center, and 3rd, and Southside Avenue. Thank you, Kevin. Because we were going to do a petition, he said he took care of it.
Well, the council took care of it, I had a conversation with them, but I just want to correct you, you did say.
We also did striping there too, right?
Well, that was.
This just includes 2nd and 3rd though, that's the first phase of it.
Okay. So
Okay, you had mentioned the center, I just wanted.
Yeah, the center. Okay. 12 years ago, Fred Tequilio, who and I were committee people in our district, we came to the board and asked for traffic calming. And what we got was 4-way stop signs on these corners of Center and 3rd. We had also asked for speed bumps. 2 days after we asked for it, Councilman Mitchell was on the case. He had counters out there. And the count was about 770 passes a day. To qualify for speed bumps, we required 2,000 passes a day. But Councilman Mitchell was right on it. But what the council did do was put up 4-way stops. And I had spoken with Hank Warner and Dennis Sullivan. They both were in my house. When we walked down the street, we had asked for illuminated stop signs. And Dennis came back in April of this year and gave us a list of about 11 intersections that we're going to get the illuminated stop signs and the striping. But Center and 3rd weren't there. And we got a lot of kids. We have a lot of stuff going on in the neighborhood. We have a lot of kids, a lot of old people. We don't have any to spare. We have a lot of speeding, and that's a universal problem within the community. But we would like to take a look at illuminating the stop signs over there on Center and 3rd, Center and 2nd, and Center and South Side. Memorial Day. Last year, we did not have a parade. We are planning on having a parade for 2023. There was a lot of misinformation given us for why the parade was canceled last year. And the American Legion was blamed for canceling it. American Legion has nothing to do with the parade. The only thing that the American Legion does is provide a repass after the parade for anybody who wants to come and have something to eat and a drink. One of the problems that we have is that the parade was always organized by the War Veterans Association. They're all dead. Okay. The last one, Ron McClear, died several weeks ago. He was the last member of that group. I kind of stepped in to help Peter about 4 or 5 years ago. I do maybe 3% of the work, getting the speaker, getting, setting up down Borough Hall, coordinating with Kevin and Rodney to get the podium and things. We're looking for people. I asked Peter Nemec the other day, I said, Peter, I got a speaker, I've got a couple of things going on for the parade. What else can I do? He said, take it over. I said, what? He said, take it over. I said, all right, 24 years. I'm tired. 22 years in the Navy, 24 years in his current position. That's 46 years. He's tired. So we're looking for people who want to help with the parade. We need all the help we can get. One last thing on the parking or the traffic calming. On Young Street, you have a sign, no U-turns. People come off 22 and on Grove Street, they find that they've gone the wrong way, they make U-turns. And there's a sign there, no U-turns. I'd like to see the same thing on the on 3rd Street, because they use my daughter's driveway for U-turns every day. I stood there the other day watching somebody just come and make a U-turn. And she lives close to South Bridge Street. And I only have one other thing, but I'm getting old, almost as old as Grant, and get forgetful. What the young lady was talking about on affordable housing. The senior citizens housing was done as an affordable part of our affordable component, Grant. That was done with a certificate of need in 1973 under Mayor Gunzelman. And that was also being used for any other affordable component that we may have gotten into. Because when I came on board, Mount Laurel had just been approved. Tell you how messed up they were at one time. They said, Somerville, you have a requirement for 4,000 affordable units. And we said, where are we going to get the land for 4,000? They said, we have 103 square miles. No, we have 2.36 square miles. And what they said was, well, you have 103. What they were using was the 08876 zip code, which at that time included Somerville, Hillsborough, Branchburg, and Bridgewater. So you have to kind of look at the numbers and massage them and ask them, how did you come up with this? But even though we have 4,000, a requirement for 4,000, and we said we don't have it, I was in Frank Wilson's office a couple of years ago. He had on his board the numbers 2241. I said, Frank, what's that? He said the number of apartments approved or on the drawing boards. And then since that time, we've gotten a couple more. We may be close to that 4,000, but yet none of them are affordable. So we'll take care of that some another conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
New ones. Yeah.
Hello, Theo Garcia, 171 Mercer. Mr. Council President, thank you very much for inviting a speaker to talk about affordable housing. I'm also heartened by the fact that members of this council acknowledge the limits of one's understanding about the topic and are willing to learn and gain more information. And I would continue to encourage this body, Mr. Council President, to continue grappling with the issue. Today we heard a speaker, but I hope that this isn't the end of it. I hope that there's more action that materializes out of it. By this body's own admission, most of the people in town are renters, one. Two, I think that we have an understanding that affordable housing comes in many shapes and forms, and that there's a lot that can be done, ranging from the big projects to ordinances, some of which the expert herself highly recommended at numerous times throughout her presentation. And so I hope that there's more that materializes out of this, and that this is just a start by getting the conversation going, by getting an understanding of terms. And I also welcome this body, Mr. Council President, to have a growth mindset. I think that from the way that the questions are being framed, we see certain hesitation from members of this body in terms of wanting perhaps not affordable housing to be in town. I think that any endeavor that will be undertaken, or any endeavor that would be commenced, would take some considerable amount of effort. But that's the case with anything. Right? 20 years ago there weren't all these high-rise buildings in town. Suddenly there are, right? And so we can definitely do it in a way that's good and that keeps into account the fact that our population base has historically been of a variety of incomes, and we shouldn't just be a town that caters only to the ultra wealthy or to certain people that can afford a certain income or household lifestyle. So again, I thank this board, or excuse me, I thank this council for inviting a speaker, and I do hope that this body, that this governing body, listens to the people. It's evident from some of the public comments, and I'm sure from some of the feedback that members of the council have received, that affordability of rent is a concern in town. If it were not, the speaker wouldn't be here, but I do hope that there's more action that is taken beyond just a presentation, and this is the start of what could be done to alleviate some of the concerns that renters have in town. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else? This time we want to close public session.
I move to close public session.
Second?
Council members Granville Brady,
Yes.
Tom Mitchell,
Yes.
Gina Stravic.
Yes.
Roger Vroom.
Yes.
Randy Pitts.
Yes. This time we have consent resolutions. Council, please let me know if you want to pull. I'm gonna pull 319. There is none. Resolution 315, authorizing the mayor and clerk to execute an agreement with Somerville County Community Development Block Grant for the 2022 ADA sidewalk improvements. 316, awarding a contract with Capital Paving and Contracting for the 2021 CDBG curb ramps for the Borough of Somerville, Somerset County. 317, accepting a grant and authorizing the mayor and clerk to execute agreement from Preserve New Jersey Historic Preservation Fund. 318, approving the hiring of Mabel Rodriguez as full-time receptionist, administrative assistant, effective November 7th. 320, extending the conditional designation of Oak Somerville LLC as redeveloper for property known as 2-10 East Main Street, Block 62, Lot 1, in the East Central Business District. 321, approving the hiring of Claudia Baye, did I say that correctly? Baye, as full-time deputy registrar, effective November 7th. 322, authorizing mayor to sign an agreement between the Township of Bridgewater, Borough of Manville, and Borough of Somerville concerning workers' compensation insurance, coverage for emergency medical service personnel. 323, extending the conditional designation of Somerville Multifamily LLC as redevelopers for property known as 23, 25, 27, and 37 South Bridge Street. 324, approving the 30th annual St. Patrick's Day Parade for Sunday, March 12th, 2023. Parade starting at 1:30. 325, approving Nasser Petties Jackson to be hired as seasonal laborer at an hourly rate of $17 for Public Works. And 326, authorizing the 7th annual Somerville 5K Turkey Trot on Thanksgiving Day, November 24th. And resolution 22-0919-303, authorizing the clerk administrator to execute the contract of sale of 106 Veterans Memorial Drive East.
That's resolution 327, was not the right number.
Sorry, resolution 327.
There you go.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, sorry.
I don't know if someone said a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Council members Granville Brady,
Yes.
Tom Mitchell,
Yes.
Gina Stravic,
Yes.
Roger Vroom.
Yes.
Randy Pitts.
Yes. Resolution 319, extending the conditional designation of DGM Properties LLC as redeveloper for the property known as Tax Block 50, Lot 2, located at 50 James Street in the Kirby Avenue redevelopment area.
So moved.
Second.
Council members Granville Brady,
Yes.
Tom Mitchell,
Yes.
Gina Stravic.
Yes.
Roger Vroom.
Yes.
Randy Pitts.
I think we have one more, don't we? That's it.
That was one, yeah.
The one that you have.
Yeah.
Bills and vouchers, I guess we're gonna hand this over to.
I would have to say that I would move to the adoption. I would like to get the council's approval and move the payment of, that's why, it's only $293,106.70.
Second.
Second, okay, I move you second, that, good.
Council members Granville Brady,
Yes.
Tom Mitchell,
Yes.
Gina Stravic,
Yes.
Roger Vroom,
Yes.
Randy Pitts.
Yes.
I wonder where Fred was, this wasn't much, I wonder where the rest of them went.
And bring us home. Tom?
Yeah, Dr. Brady should do the bills and vouchers from now on, he gets much better numbers.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Aye.